You're tuned in to Women in America, the podcast that dives deep into the issues shaping gender equality in the U.S. and beyond. Hosted by Pari and Eve, public health professionals by day, content creators by passion, we bring you expert insights, compelling stories, and actionable strategies to push the fight for equality forward. On this episode of Women in America, we telescope onto Trump's executive order targeting women's financial freedom. Let's dive in.
A week before the election, we went mega viral because I had the audacity to say to the internet that I did not know if women would continue to have credit cards in this new administration. And lo and behold, I get to once again say, I told you so.
Which is hilarious because half of the comments on that video were people saying that you were fear-mongering. Women will always have credit cards. It's based in law. They can't take that away from us. And yet, you broke the news to me earlier this week about a new Trump executive order that's attempting to do just that, to take away women's financial independence.
And I don't think it's actually surprising that I had to break the news to you because I feel like this news is being buried, very much, in line with the flood the zone strategy. But I think before we actually cover the executive order, what is important for people to know is that women receive the right to own credit cards because apparently you have to guarantee that right in 1974. Okay, it was the same year that we gained the right to open our own bank account. And both of those rights came via the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Okay,
how generous of men to give us that right 50 years ago. Like, so kind of them to give us something that's already owed.
It's so funny because I know you're being sarcastic, but that's literally what men say to us.
I know. I know. Laugh crying.
So, in 1974, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act granted women the legal right to open bank accounts, own credit cards, and not just those two things, but access other financial services independently. Okay, that's the key thing here, meaning women no longer needed a male co-signer.
Okay,
so prior to this,
I don't need my dad, I don't need my brother, I don't need my husband to sign for me or with me to get a loan to buy a house or to get a loan to do XYZ.
Exactly, because the Equal Credit Opportunity Act outlawed the discrimination based on sex and marital status, specifically in banking. Okay. Which means that prior to that, if you were married, banks required your husband's permission in order to offer you a credit card or open a bank account. If you were unmarried, you either got blanket denied or you had to have a male co-signer. So a dad or a brother, an uncle, someone like that, right? And the Equal Credit Opportunity Act was the one that changed all of that, which means that women finally had some semblance of financial independence. Now, the executive order that Trump has signed is written in a way that does not at all make clear what it's actually putting at risk, right?
Of course.
They basically use fluff language and they keep it intentionally broad so that it can cover anything. But the executive order I'm referring to, if people want to look it up, we will include it in the show notes, but it is titled Restoring Equality of Opportunity and Meritocracy. Okay? Which, before we even get into the contents, the title alone should flag something for you because restoring equality, I mean, we are in the situation where things are equal. So if you're talking about restoring something that used to be, that immediately tells me that you are not actually about the equality piece of this,
But also equality for whom?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I'm saying. And then that last word, meritocracy, makes very clear who they're referencing, right? It's the exact same.
Because we know that most positions that white men hold were not gained based on merit. They were gained based on being white men.
Careful, Eve, they'll come for you.
That's okay. They already do.
The meritocracy piece is the exact same thing that they used to get rid of DEI. And so that if you're someone who's like really plugged into the words that this admin uses, that should immediately be a red alarm, right? And if it is, you'd be correct because here's what this executive order says. So it has like four different pieces of it that I think are good to summarize. All right. I'm not actually going to read it out. I'm simply going to explain what it means or the way normal people talk. So the first thing it does is it targets liability. So what that means is the executive order is seeking to get rid of people's ability to file a claim of discrimination. So a bank can now say that you are not going to be able to receive, X financial item, whether it's a credit card, whether it's a bank account, whatever it is, and they don't have to provide a reason. And this executive order is now saying that they are capable of doing that because now people are not able to actually file for liability against them. Okay, so we already know, not just in banking, in almost every aspect of life, that people who are marginalized or disproportionately affected are never really able to recover unless there is like affirmative action put in place because the systems are designed to keep those folks down, right? Which is why we needed the Equal Credit Opportunity Act in the first place, because it tells banks and financial institutions that they cannot discriminate on the basis of sex or protected characteristics. So if you are not able to sue somebody, or if there's no legal liability to denying someone, a service or a practice or anything, basically you have weakened any legal protections that people have. Like now, people can actively and openly discriminate on women, on people based on their sexual orientation, whatever it is, they can take away economic opportunities from those people, and there's no consequences to that.
Right. Now
So,
people have no recourse if they're discriminated against based on sex.
yes, exactly. That's the first piece. It very easily lends itself into the
Only
second.
the first piece?
Yeah. So it very quickly lends itself into the second piece. Like, right, they're saying like you cannot newly discriminate, you cannot newly pursue liability against any discrimination. Then they're actually even going historical. They're saying any pending cases of discrimination are now going to be looked at by the administration themselves, which means that if you have been discriminated in the past while the Equal Credit Opportunity Act was in full force, you may no longer have a case anymore because they are retroactively going to be looking at cases that are existing.
Mhm.
Okay, so one thing that is important to specify here is that executive orders are not law, right? So they don't directly change the law, but they put up a number of walls and barriers between the actual law and then what happens in real life. So while the executive order does not directly change
Mhm.
the law is the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. This executive order could potentially hinder enforcement of the law and stall any existing litigation that would have otherwise protected women from discrimination, whether it's about credit cards or bank accounts or any financial element.
Oh my
Three,
God, can we take a breather? This is a lot of heavy stuff.
it's
I
just the truth, okay? It's what's
let's
happening.
I I do understand what the long game is,
Mm-hmm.
but it confuses me because Republicans try to stand on economic issues, right? Like strong economy, being financially conservative in order to, improve the economy. In the US, women make up like 60% of consumer spending. Globally, we make up like 75% of discretionary spending. But in the US, it's like more than half of consumer spending is by women. So if you limit our ability to get credit cards, it's going to tank the economy. Also,
Remember
like,
when Taylor Swift was touring and
yes,
she literally changed the GDP of some countries because of that tour? You want to speak about the spending power of women. Like that
right. That
is
was
the
not
best
men buying
example.
tickets to her show.
Yeah.
So if they limit our ability to get credit cards, there's that. And also, like, I'm sorry, but women are usually the like financial head of household these days because they are making all the home purchases. They are buying the groceries. A lot of times they're paying utilities. Like, so what does that do if you don't have access to like financial mechanisms in your own name and you're running all the finances for the household?
Well, first of all, how dare you suggest that men are not providers? Like the absolute audacity of you to even say such a
I'm not
thing.
arguing that because the gender wage gap is still so huge. We know that across the board men make more, so they can be the breadwinner, but they're not making decisions around family spending. The women are.
I know what you're saying. I'm pointing out that you're like telling me the reason why you think they wouldn't do this, and I'm telling you that's exactly the reason they would. The United States rate of birth and fertility and marriage have decreased, right? For very legitimate reasons. And if we, when it comes to the fertility rate and the birth rate, there are a number of policy decisions that have resulted in that outcome, as well as our lack of focus on climate change, the cost of living, the gun control, all of these things, right?
Yeah.
So if we put that aside for a second, let's just look at the rate of marriages in the U.S.
Mhm.
And this is probably a global issue, but we'll focus on the U.S. since this executive order only affects the U.S. There are so many people that have this weird, somehow very skewed perception that the reason why the marriage rate is less now than, let's say, it was 60 years ago is because of feminism. The red pill movement has essentially used that as an excuse to just pile onto women even more than they already do.
I know you're going to move on and say what it actually is, but if we pause there for a second, why would that be a problem in and of itself?
Yeah, just
But carry on, please.
it would be a problem even because they don't want women to be happy. People are going to listen to this episode and be like, that's not a scientific reason. But it is very much a cultural phenomenon that we're experiencing in the United States. Like the red pill movement is so committed to destroying everything that women have. A few strides that we have made towards equality, they want to roll that back because it honestly pains them to see a population that they've
Yeah.
marginalized so bad somewhat starting to thrive, right? And not just that, but somewhat starting to thrive without them. And frankly, I think that is what this is about. Like they are looking at the rate of marriage and they're like, oh my God, our grandmothers were so much better at being women and being like, raising households. They didn't complain. They didn't like get divorces. And I'm like, no, bitch, your grandmother was chained at the ankle because she could not own her own money.
Yeah.
She could not have a bank account, spend any money without her husband knowing and tracking that. There, she might have loved your
She
granddad, but
didn't have a
like
choice.
the fact that she is literally beholden to a man for her ability to exist in our society, pretty sure that had a large part of why marriages were lasting back then. And now women have gained a little bit more equality and not even as much as men have, right? Just like slightly more than they used to have. It's not like we've equalized with men or we've surpassed men, and yet somehow the entire society is like, this is a travesty. We cannot allow this to happen. And I truly believe that part of, I started this whole rant of mine because you asked me, like, what's their end goal? What's their end game? And I think it is because they really want to create an environment in which women are dependent on men again, like
Mhm.
truly dependent, not just for, companionship or partnership or equitable household distribution. No, no, no. They want us like they want to like cut us off at the knees and have us basically be beholden to men so that we are entering into marriages, we are staying in perhaps unhappy or unproductive marriages and eventually producing the future workers and the labor force that they need from us.
But the
I really think
workforce
that
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 they're
is what
not
it
going
is.
to keep healthy. So they're doing all of this at the risk of the economy, at the risk of the workforce, at the risk of America's public health, because their whole goal is to just keep women down at all other
Yeah.
costs, at any expense.
I mean, and we have not actually brought up religion in this conversation yet, but I do think that actually has a significant portion to do with the ways in which they are now designing policy to create the society that they want, right?
Oh, you know that I
And
would do, let's do a whole episode on that.
we actually should, we really should. And it's sad because like if you actually look at the religion itself, like the Bible does not say that things have to be a certain way, right? But
Mhm.
Christian nationalists have just like written their own
They
damn
do
book at this
say,
point.
yes, they do
Yeah.
say. I mean, Trump has his own Bible.
Yes, it's true. It's
Okay.
his mirror, basically.
Number three.
But
What was the
yeah,
third part? Keep going.
okay. This is from the fuel into the fire. Okay, so the third is, well, let's recap. The first is that you cannot pursue any new litigation.
Got it, got it.
The second is that they're retroactively examining existing litigation.
Awesome.
The third is that those two things are now very much setting a runway for a potential future rollback of other protections as well, right?
Cool, cool, cool,
If
cool.
you are saying that the executive order is now putting up barriers to the implementation of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, that
Mhm.
same executive order could very well lead to a rollback of regulations that are designed to protect women's rights in other ways. So it would make it harder for women to access federal resources, to advocate against gender discrimination. It might affect public welfare systems. We actually don't know, not because we are uninformed about it, but because they have purposely kept the language so broad that they can apply it and implement it in any way they want, really. And so it could even, let's say, it could even allow federally funded projects to discriminate based on gender or sexual orientation. So, for example, if there's, let's say, a federally funded food assistance program, they might actually be legally within their rights to deny people food simply because they are of a certain group. And I'm not
Oh,
saying that that is happening yet. I'm just saying that that is very much what this has opened the door
well,
to. In
I
fact,
mean,
not
as
just
a
open the door, but like welcoming in.
sidebar, they're not doing it in a discriminatory way. They're just cutting the supplemental food programs like SNAP and WIC.
True.
They're cutting it across the board, and then they'll discriminate in how whatever little is left, how they
Yeah.
distribute that.
Yeah. And the fourth part is maybe
Fourth?
the yeah, the fourth. The fourth is the last one. At least the way that I have organized my thoughts around it. This is not like an official analysis or anything. I'm just trying to say, like, I tried to read through this very wordy document that felt like it was full of fluff and discern what they're actually telling us, right? And the fourth thing they're telling us is about that last word in the title, meritocracy. What
Mm,
they're doing is essentially the EO is objectively going to make it more difficult for women to access financial resources, right? Which means that it makes it ultimately more difficult for women to access financial security in the future. And their justification, which is a funny word to use here, but their justification for this is in quotation marks, meritocracy and a colorblind society.
oh
Okay, it
God.
explicitly says that term, which means that they are in saying that they want to treat individuals independent of their protected characteristic like race and sex. Which theoretically, like I could see from a MAGA brain, people would be like, wait, that's a great idea. But what it actually is in reality is they are saying that some people deserve to have credit cards and others don't.
Hmm.
Some people deserve to own bank accounts and others don't. And the thing that makes you deserving can be as simple as your race or your sex or your sexual orientation. Like that's basically what it is.
Hmm.
So what's going to happen is that our already existing systemic inequalities in society are going to be even further propagated because now we have an executive order that is stopping the implementation of a law that was explicitly designed to promote equality. So it's trouble, and I'm worried that not enough people are aware of it because of the number of executive orders that get released in a given week.
I mean,
You
not
know?
just the number of executive orders, but going back to how you explain that it's written in quite vague terms,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very intentional. Not I think, I know. It is very intentional. It's a marketing tool that if you don't give people specifics, they can't pick up on it and report about it. They don't really know what you are trying to limit. So that in and of itself restricts how much people can talk about it because it's just speculating, right? It's not rooted in anything that they've actually written. And so it controls for the amount of press coverage that this gets so that the public doesn't really know about it and can't push back.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point, and I didn't even put that together, even though I know that theoretically. Because even like with you and me, for example, when we see news come out that is within our immediate wheelhouse,
Hmm.
reproductive rights, we have to read the article and figure out what are the actual three key messages that we would share with the generic public, right?
Hmm.
And I think that it's easy for us to do that because we're very used to this language and know how to read between the lines, but it is not normal and should not be expected of everybody to be able to do that. So it makes perfect sense, and that is definitely what they're doing. And frankly, I will say, even as someone like us who is constantly in this and like constantly scanning the news, when I first saw the EO come out, when I first read it, I actually took a second. I was like, what are they even talking about? And it wasn't until, like I said, the reason why I read it in the first place was because the title flagged certain things for me, right? It was the word restoring
Hmm.
and then meritocracy that were like two red flags. And then when I saw the actual Equal Credit Opportunity Act name dropped, I was like, oh shit, that is what this is
You're like,
about, you
oh
know?
no.
Yeah. And I was like, listen, I obviously was glad to be right, but also I wish I wasn't right about this,
No,
you
these are
know?
things you don't want to be right about when you're right about what you think Trump's malicious intent is.
Yeah, it's true. But can you imagine? I mean, just like it, I don't even think we can picture it because we have lived our entire lives having access to this stuff. But
No.
truly, just for a few seconds, try and picture what it would be like if you didn't have access to money,
I mean,
you
I'm
know?
just trying to like think about it in terms of when I bought my condo. If I had to have my dad, my brother, my boyfriend's signature on my loan, I built up all that credit myself, which if this was passed, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do so. But
Right.
so with no credit, I would have been forced to have some man in my life sign for this and co-own my home, which right
Mhm.
now is entirely mine.
Yeah. I'm curious if they would even co-own or just own it outright. I mean, like,
Oh, is it co-signing or just them signing the loan?
yeah, I'm not sure, but like, yeah, I mean, women couldn't even own property until 1900.
I
So,
remember when we first talked about this a while ago, I'm the eternal optimist. So I was like, "Oh, maybe they decided to let women own property because when their husband dies, they want them to not be like out in the street and be able to hold on to their husband's house." And then you said,
it's actually unfortunately the opposite. Is that the reason why all the states started to adopt this law that said that women should be able to own property is because they were like, we want women to be able to pass the ownership of their property over through their wills
to their male
to their
heirs.
sons.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. So it's all to
And
serve the man.
yes, but in the defense of certain states, like the reason that law came up, okay, so it happened in 1900, first of all. It was an epilogue to the New York Married Women's Property Act from 1848, which nobody needs to remember that. But my point is that New York was the first state that was like, wait a second, we need to remedy this shit. I can't be certain whether New York's intention behind doing that was truly patriarchal because they were the first. And so I do think that there was probably some level of equitable, approach assumed with that. But it took another 50 years before the other states had all adopted laws to do
Mm,
it. But I will put an asterisk on that and say that in 1900, women gained legal property rights, yes.
hmm.
But in actual practice, I'm saying like there's a difference always between the law and between how it's implemented.
Hmm.
In actual practice, they still face challenges for many years beyond that. Because think about it, they couldn't own credit cards, couldn't have bank accounts, so they could not access their own credit. So even if they had home ownership as a right, like what does that really mean if you're not even able to access the money that you need to be able to
Yeah,
buy
true.
that home in the first place, right? So that actually was not addressed until all the way in 1968, so almost 70 years later with the Fair Housing Act and then our beautiful Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which came in 19. So,
You
it's
know what I'm taking away from this?
not something good.
No, it's great, especially
Oh,
for,
okay.
yeah, for you. I don't have any like girls younger than me in my family. I'm surrounded by men and boys, which is fine. Love them dearly. except for my mother, but she's older, so this would not benefit her. I want to pass down my home if something were to happen to me to a younger woman or a girl.
Mhm. Mhm.
And do you know who the only one is in my life right now that fits that mold? It's
Little
your
baby.
it's your daughter. So I think
Amazing.
I need to update my will to give her my condo if anything happens to me,
That's so kind.
to
But
keep like,
hopefully,
yeah, gender equality and finance alive.
yeah. I mean, but can you imagine? That's such a shame that we have to think about that. I mean, obviously, thinking about that for your own kids is very normal and encouraged, but like the fact that women have to think about building this ecosystem for their fellow women because actually we
Mhm.
don't know that it's going to exist in,
Mhm.
I was going to say in a few years, but frankly, in 6 months is even just alarming, you know? So
Yeah.
it's wild. But I brought the reason why I wanted to focus this episode on the Equal Credit Opportunity Act is like I said, because I don't think a lot of people realize that it is currently very much at risk. But I want to point out that this is just one of, unfortunately, many ways in which they are trying to come at women's autonomy, right? I think in the US, people have become a little too accustomed to the word autonomy being associated only with reproductive rights, but that's not what that word actually means. Autonomy means all sorts of, it means independence in general. So like your ability to own your own choices and make your own choices. And if you cannot own a credit card or if you can't have a bank account without having someone else sign for you, there is no autonomy. You are not, in my opinion, the same level of a citizen as a man is. You are second, if not third class. And there are many ways in which the government is exactly trying to implement that scenario into real life. We spent this episode talking about financial futures, but a few episodes ago we were talking about the Save Act, which was coming after women's right to vote, and that's another example. But luckily, we have some good news on that front. Eve.
It got tabled because we screamed loud enough at our Republican representatives that they were like, fuck this, we need a break and we cannot push this forward anymore. These people are annoying. Which
Yeah,
tells me
but
and us that advocacy works. If there is enough public pressure and public outrage, and there was, because I don't know if other folks saw it, but my entire social media feed a few weeks ago was how the SAVE Act was going to take away the women's right to vote. And it
yeah,
freaking worked. People blew up the congressional switchboard and were like, don't you fucking dare. I will
yeah.
unvote you out of office so quickly during your next campaign, you won't even know what hit you. And Republicans were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, we haven't desensitized women enough to release the right to vote yet. We have to go back to the drawing board.
I'm glad you said it that way though, because it is a yet. It truly is like the Save Act was the first attack. They're going to come back. But I think that this is enough for all of us and everyone listening to continue to stay energized about this, right? What you are doing is working. Like anytime you raise an alarm about something, anytime you share a story with someone else, anytime you're like, wait, what the fuck? And you decide to actually do something about that feeling, it is actually making change. Like the Save Act is not the only thing that was tabled. They also tabled the autism registry that RFK Jr. has proposed, which, two major wins. And at this point, we should take any win that we can get. And so our point is simply we share this information not to depress and not to make you feel overwhelmed, but to say, like, okay, this is the next thing that you have to fight back against, because it's working and you have way more power than you might think.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Women in America. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your network and don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. For additional resources, follow us on social media at Gemma_talks. See you next week.